What's going on YouTube? Welcome to another video. You're joining me here for a squat workout, lower body, etc. Starting off here with the usual SSB, the lifesaver of this recovery series, allowing me to squat post-surgery relatively after, and then going into this now. It's become my staple. Definitely some changes coming and some adjustments to be made, but this form of squat has just been super easy with the shoulder recovery and everything else, and just being able to do the things that I enjoy. So didn't really push weight during the whole, series where we're trying to rebuild or whatever, and that's the intelligent part bumped in there. But just being consistent, getting the movements down, and then when I start to feel healthy, pushing weight and, having some sort of plan going forward, which is how I've always trained. I like to be on a program. I like to be, have foresight into what I'm doing and intentionality. You could make a lot of progress YOLOing stuff if you're like decently strong and recovering and maybe monitoring volume. But I like to train, a lot of volume, maybe not on the compounds, but with the secondary and tertiary movements, the isolation, the quote unquote bodybuilding movements. I tend to like those more. I like feeling that pump, but we want to make sure that we get a nice balance of strength. You could do a lot of hypertrophy stuff with that, but as you start getting stronger, you start getting into those thresholds of strength where it may not make sense to do a moderate set at maybe 80% for 10 reps on squats. That might put you in a position to not recover well, to be injured, etc., and to kind of go from there. So I found, at least for me, a happy medium of lifting heavy with the movements and then using the other secondary and tertiary movements to pick up the volume, to stimulate that muscle growth and get bigger. And that's just always been my training philosophy. Obviously if you're in like a more bare bones gym, you may want to utilize techniques like this. Like you could go heavy on squats, relatively speaking, of course, and then drop back with lighter reps to be able to, pick up that extra volume. But honestly, these free weight movements can get taxing, like I mentioned before, though. So just really figure out what works for you. Deadlifting consistently here again, 375, just taking my time and just trying to make sure that everything's firing. I'm staying nice and tight, and probably the slowest I've ever deadlifted in my life before. I'm usually a fast deadlifter. That's usually what I'm known for. But really just taking my time with these movements to make sure that I'm good. Belt squat here. Again, just a perfect example of volume to be added to a singular movement that you've been doing. So yes, I've squatted, with the SSB though, but now I'm getting a different type of focus here where I can really remove that spinal loading and focus on the hamstrings, the glutes, quads, calves. And you can, manipulate this as you need. If you need to pause, slow it down tempo to kind of go from there. It just makes it a lot easier, to target those specific muscle groups. It's probably the most isolation of all the quote unquote compounds. Obviously you're moving multiple different muscle groups, but you can kind of just see like it's a lot easier to just focus on that posterior chain, that lower body. And I've enjoyed it. It's made doing squats a lot more manageable for me, because I generally hate squats. I don't like the feeling of being compressed. So you really just have to figure out how you want to progress. And I've done both, where I've done like high rep stuff and then strength and then a mixture of both, because obviously when you start getting stronger, you can do more weight, which is key for growth. And then obviously progressive resistance, you want to add weight over time, sets, reps, etc., and kind of go from there. So a couple different settings in the belt squat you can use to kind of like emphasize form. So I'll usually use the second, basically the middle or the third hook. Sometimes you go a little too far forward and it's uncomfortable in like the quads and the glutes and stuff like that. So yeah, just kind of figure out what works for you. Obviously, like the depth could be deeper. I've been trying to find a way to do that, but I feel the way that the squat is, instead of being like a vertical stimulus, it's kind of pushing you down. It's, you're shifting perpendicular to it, so it moves differently, so you can't sink as deeply as you normally would. So single leg press here, just some variety. I'm really liking unilateral work lately. It's just really helping stimulate everything. And my God, my calves look tiny compared to my upper leg. And so like this is the thing here. I'm just like, oh my God. Black is slimming, which is why I wear a lot of it. But it's just It's kind of crazy to see how long my lower leg is, and with all the calf work and stuff that I do, including the upper leg stuff, and it's just like, it's hard to tell. You know, everything's in a balance, so the bigger one area looks, it's going to make another one look smaller. So back benching here again, nice and controlled. Same thing here, and I mentioned in the previous video, I would just start jumping up to the weights I was using in the videos. I wanted to show the bar as warm-ups just to remind you that sometimes getting back to the basics and going light is a nice way to calibrate yourself going forward, and then making those steady jumps to be where you want to be, especially if you're injured and you can't do as much weight. You know, what's extra work you can get in the build-up to the lift. It's a few extra low-intensity sets for reps to get you warmed up, but also to get some hypertrophy work and technique work and stuff too. So don't skimp on that. Calibrate yourself for those heavier sets so that when you get there, they look relatively similar to how you warmed up. You know, any deviations and stuff and just being inconsistent can lead to injuries. It can lead to a lot of other issues. So just make sure that you're monitoring all that. Once you've been injured once, it's just like really annoying to get back to things. You're frustrated, you know you're stronger, you can handle more, but it's a process. And a lot of us haven't been there in a while because we've been training safely, consistently for years, and you're just always primed and conditioned to handle the workload that you're doing. So, you know, figure out kind of what works best for you and just kind of go from there. So consistency, use the same bench, the same rack, everything like that, and really just standardize the lift stuff. Obviously, if you're traveling, going to different gyms, it can be different, but just kind of have your fallbacks and go-tos. Honestly, it makes your lifting so much more efficient and easier. That's why you tend to see the same racks and positions that I use, and sometimes I'll transition if I'm, you know, need a change of pace or whatever, but, you know, it's all for like mental stuff. You know, like if you might get sick and tired of training in the same spot for long, and maybe stimulate the mind with different setups. Finding out a different setup that may be a little bit more beneficial for you is kind of what I've done, and that's just what I've always, you know, tried to do, especially in private gyms. If you're in a commercial gym and you're at the mercy of the crowd and other people, yeah, may not be the same case though, but you know, just try to find things when you're dialed in. You know, when I train, I put my headphones in, I've got my music going. I really don't talk to people outside of, you know, my rest sets or anything like that. I've got my watch on, my Apple Watch, which I set the timer consistently, so I always know it will vibrate in your wrist and let you know when your rest sets are over, so you can kind of keep track. You know, you don't need to bother with your phone, you don't need to keep an eye on a stopwatch or somewhere else there. You can just literally have that vibration on your wrist and it'll let you know it's time to go. And then you can also adjust it if, you know, you're, you know, need more time, or maybe you're feeling good, you can move faster. That's just what I've always done. So, you know, figure out what works for you, little tips and tricks, and be efficient in your workout. There were some times in the past where I would take way too long to do stuff and just not a good time. So, but anyway, on the actual lift, dumbbell overhead press here, like I mentioned before with barbell, is just super useful for standardizing injuries and helping, you know, return range of motion back. So, you know, you're going to see a lot of same movements here, but we're always looking to improve. Anyway, like, comment, subscribe. See you in the next one. Thanks for watching the latest video. If you want to help support the channel, I actually own my own wet shaving and grooming e-commerce website where everything's handmade by me. It's www.apexsoaps.com, and you can get a 10% off code using wet shaver. We've got some cool scents here. We've got some Coca-Cola scents, a horchata scent, traditional barbershop, just some really cool stuff. And you can purchase samples or you can buy the whole set. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out via email. Be quick to respond. Thanks for watching.